Hello everyone! All of these tools here are common network termination tools. We have extra network cable that is not terminated. Here's a crimping tool and some RJ45 connectors that we can use to terminate our network cable. We have a couple of steps in order to successfully build a custom length network cable. First step is to commonly measure the length of the cable you're going to need. This is a great reason for making your own cables because we like to pick a custom length and not have to buy a pre-made cable with a pre-picked length. Now that we have our measured length of cable, we can use the cutting blade on our crimping tool to cut our cable at the cutting blade right here. I'd put the cable in, and I'd be able to cut it if needed. We can use the cable stripper to strip the outer housing off the network cable. We're going to place the cable in this groove right here on our cable stripper. And we can go rather far on this cable without a problem. Just take that into account when you're talking about length. I can press and hold the cable stripper down on the cable, and I'll just twist it, and this is going to cut through that outer sheath. You can see that right here, how it's coming off. After removing the outer sheath, you'll find 4 pairs of wires. We'll have to untwist the 4 pairs and organize them into 8 individual copper wires. When you're separating those 4 pairs from each other, what I find in the middle of mine is this plastic separator. This is common in our Cat6 wires like this one, which allows it to prevent interference and crosstalk between our pairs. What we're going to do right now is cut this plastic separator off because it's going to be in the way when we try to put our RJ45 connector on. So I can take my cutting tool and just cut that plastic separator off. It does a great job inside of the cable, but it's in the way for the RJ45 connector. Also, what we'll find in my cable is the string. These are meant to be pull strings that allow you to pull on the sheath and be able to slice through the sheath. That's also going to be in the way for me, so I'm going to cut that off because we don't need it at this time. So this is where we now want to untwist all the wires, and this is going to take us some time to do. What we're going to find is that each pair of wires, well, they're going to be having different number of twists per inch, and you'll be able to see that. For example, the one that's going to be the hardest to untwist is going to be blue, white, blue. That has more twists per inch, for example, than looking at brown, white, brown. Those more twists per inch for each pair is going to allow us to have less crosstalk and interference between those pairs. They thought of everything, didn't they? So I'll continue to untwist and we'll come back. Now that my 8 individual wires are untwisted, what we want to do is pull them all so they're really straight. The straighter you can make them, the easier it's going to be to organize the wires in the correct color code, as well as the easier it will be to crimp them with the RJ45 connector. Now I'm not worrying right now too much about color code organization. I just want to get them as straight as possible. What some people like to do is if you can gather all of them at the end of the wires with your fingers, then you can actually pull it straight and wiggle it back and forth, and you get straighter wires. Now what I'd like to do is organize them in the correct color code. There's different standards, 568A or 568B. I'm going to follow the T568B standard and put these wires in the correct order. That order is going to be orange, white, orange, green, white, blue, blue, white, green, brown, white, brown. And to do that, I'm just going to take the orange, white and put it all the way to the side, followed by orange. Then I'll follow that one correctly with the green, white, and bring that one over. And then follow it with the next color. I'll do that and we'll come back. Once you have them in the correct color order, such as we see here, we like to take one of light it on. Now the current problem is that connector is not going to fit well. The wires are too long. We want this sheath to be about here in the connector. So when we crimp, this connector is going to hold on to that sheath, not onto the wires. So what I need to do is take my tool, which I can take either a pair of snips or a cutting tool like this, and I need to cut these shorter. So I'll go ahead and I'm just going to give it a snip. Make sure you use a tool that's sharp. You want a nice, even cut as much as possible. Now that these wires are cut, we can verify that they're still in the correct order, and we can take an RJ45 connector, and we're going to slide this on just like so. And we'll push those in tight. We can watch those wires go into the RJ45 connector. Push far enough, and we should see that plastic sheath go in as well. Awesome. We can check the front of the RJ45 connector and see all those color codes coming in beautifully. Now we'll take our crimper and we'll slide our cable into the crimper. It's all the way in. We'll give it a tight squeeze. And now it's crimped on. We can see it holding on to the plastic sheath, and our 8 copper wires are all the way in. Since now the connector is attached to the 8 wires in the outer housing, before we deploy this, we should verify the quality of the cable. You take something like this, which is a cable tester, plug it in on both sides, turn it on, and we'll be able to watch it go, checking the quality of our cable, and we should see all 8 wires come up as successful. We'll see 8 lines, and we did it. All 8 lines came up, letting us know the quality of our cable is perfect. You're able to see that right here. And tells us this is a 3-foot cable. So hopefully you have a 3-foot purpose. Grab some tools and get started crafting your own custom length network cable. Ethernet switches connect devices such as computers, printers, and routers, which are on the same Ethernet local area network. Devices on an Ethernet LAN communicate with each other using Ethernet MAC addresses. The MAC addresses in this video have been shortened for brevity. These MAC addresses are embedded on the device's Ethernet NIC network interface card. For example, when PC A sends data to server B, it does so by sending that message to the server's Ethernet MAC address CCCC. When a switch receives a message, it examines the destination MAC address in the message to determine which port to forward the data. It is important to note that devices also use IP addresses to communicate. IP addresses are used by devices to communicate so they can communicate with one another when they are on different networks. So switches forward data within the same network, while routers forward data between different networks. In this example, PC A is sending a message to server B, which is on a different network. This message, known as an IP packet, is sent to the local router PC A's default gateway. When the router receives this message, it will examine the packet's destination IP address to determine where to forward the data. Routers have routing tables, which tell them where to forward packets. If the IP address of the destination device, server B in this example, is not on a network directly connected to this router, it will forward the packet to another router. If the IP address of the destination device is on a directly connected network, it can then forward the message directly to that device. Ethernet switches connect devices such as computers, printers, and routers, which are on the same Ethernet local area network. Devices on an Ethernet LAN communicate with each other using Ethernet MAC addresses. The MAC addresses in this video have been shortened for brevity. These MAC addresses are embedded on the device's Ethernet NIC network interface card. For example, when PC A sends data to server B, it does so by sending that message to the server's Ethernet MAC address CCCC. When a switch receives a message, it examines the destination MAC address in the message to determine which port to forward the data. It is important to note that devices also use IP addresses to communicate. IP addresses are used by devices to communicate with each other on the same network, but are also used so they can communicate with one another when they are on different networks. So switches forward data within the same network, while routers forward data between different networks. In this example, PC A is sending a message to server B, which is on a different network. This message, known as an IP packet, is sent to the local router PC A's default gateway. When the router receives this message, it will examine the packet's destination IP address to determine where to forward the data. Routers have routing tables, which tell them where to forward packets. If the IP address of the destination device, server B in this example, is not on a network directly connected to this router, it will forward the packet to another router. If the IP address of the destination device is on a directly connected network, it can then forward the message directly to that device. IPv6 addresses are represented in hexadecimal notation. Each hexadecimal digit is 4 bits, which means each segment of 4 hexadecimal digits will be 16 bits. There are 8 16-bit segments, with each segment separated by a colon. 8 16-bit segments gives us the 128 bits. IPv6 addresses are typically represented in compressed format. The first rule is that leading zeros of any 16-bit segment can be omitted. Note it. The second rule is that a single string of contiguous all zero segments can be replaced by a single double colon. Notice that 2 segments in red with all zeros can be replaced by a single double colon, also in red. An IPv6 address can utilize only one double colon. Here we see an example of combining both rules. Rule 1 omits the leading zeros, and Rule 2 allows us to use a double colon to represent 2 all zero segments. Together, they give us the IPv6 address in compressed format. Similar to IPv4, IPv6 uses slash notation, the prefix length to indicate the network portion, the prefix of the IPv6 address. The /64 in our example indicates that the network portion of the address. This means the rest of the address in red is the host portion. The IPv6 address has all 0 bits in the host portion, indicated by all zeros in hexadecimal in red, or a single double colon, also in red. Let's look at an IPv6 example. We have 2 IPv6 networks. 2001 DB8 a CAD 100 double colon /64 and 2001 DB8 a CAD 200 double colon /64. Notice that all the devices in both networks share the same prefix length, which means the network portion of their addresses are identical, indicated in blue. Their host portions are unique, indicated in red, PCA has the IPv6 host address 2001:DB8 a CAD 100:77/64. If PCA moves to a different network, its IPv6 address will change, and perhaps its prefix length. As you can see, PCA now has the IPv6 address 2001:DB8 a CAD 200:77/64, which means it is now part of the 2001:DB8 a CAD 200:64 network. In this video, we are going to examine Ethernet MAC addresses. But first, let's begin with an analogy of Talithia wanting to communicate with Jeremy. Talithia and Jeremy are the only two people in the room within hearing distance of each other. So without having to mention Jeremy by name, Talithia just asks, "Hi, how are you?" Jeremy knows Talithia is talking to him and replies also without mentioning Talithia by name. But what if there are more than just two people in the room? Now, if Talithia says, "Hi, how are you?" each person in the room is wondering who Talithia is speaking to. To ensure that Jeremy knows Talithia is speaking to him, Talithia will include Jeremy's name in the message. "Hi, Jeremy. How are you?" Now Jeremy knows Talithia is talking to him and will respond using Talithia's name when speaking to her. Ethernet LANs use MAC addresses, media access control addresses, to accomplish the same thing. Every NIC, network interface card, has a unique 48-bit MAC address embedded into the card, represented in hexadecimal notation. Also known as a physical address, the MAC address never changes and will be the same wherever the device is located. Ethernet MAC address has two parts. The first 24 bits represent the organizationally unique identifier, or OUI. This is the vendor or manufacturer portion of the address. For example, one of several OUI codes associated to Cisco systems is 00602F, as shown in the example. The second 24 bits are assigned by the vendor and unique to that particular OUI. For example, 3807BC is unique to the vendor code 00602F. 48 bits, with the OUI and vendor assigned portions each being 24 bits. MAC addresses are typically represented in hexadecimal 6 Ethernet MAC addresses are used for NIC card to NIC card communications on the same network. On an Ethernet LAN, there can be multiple devices. Similar to Talithia speaking to Jeremy, when a device on a LAN needs to communicate with another device on the same LAN, it is important that that device includes the MAC address of the destination in the message. Otherwise, the devices won't know who the message is for. When PC A sends a message to printer B, it will send it to printer B's MAC address. Routers on an Ethernet LAN will also have an Ethernet NIC, which means it has an Ethernet MAC address. Notice router D has two Ethernet NICs, one for each network it is connected to. That is what routers do. They connect to multiple networks. Router D's Ethernet NIC, with the address that ends in all Ds, is only used to communicate with other devices on the same network, with PC A, printer B, and server C. Router D's Ethernet NIC, with the address ending in all E's, is used to communicate with devices on a separate network. This NIC cannot be reached by devices on the other LAN, such as PC A. When server C sends a message for a device on another network, it will send the message to router D's MAC address ending in all D's. Router D will forward this message off the appropriate interface towards the destination device. A firewall is a network security device or software within a device that monitors and controls incoming and outgoing network traffic based on a predetermined set of security rules. An integrated router typically contains a switch, a router, and a firewall. The firewall acts as a barrier between a trusted internal network and an untrusted external network, such as the internet. Firewalls use various devices to enforce a predetermined set of security rules. This may include one or more access control lists, ACLs, used to determine what type of traffic will be permitted or denied. Two other types of security devices are intrusion detection systems, IDSs, and intrusion prevention systems, IPSs. An IDS passively monitors traffic on the network, comparing the captured traffic stream with known malicious signatures. An IPS actively monitors traffic before reaching the destination. If the data is acceptable, the traffic is permitted. If the data is unacceptable, then the traffic will be denied. The firewall portion of our Cisco wireless router and firewall combo. Your router should also have some similar features to the ones we are about to demonstrate today. So this router/firewall is connection to the web via the internet port. We can take a look. I'll go ahead and click on status. Takes me to a dashboard. We can see that the WAN port is connected. It's lit up and green. This dashboard can give us a lot of info, including we have a computer connected in off of port 1 of our LAN port. My computer is sitting behind this router firewall in the local area network. This is the inside network, and we would have the ability to configure that inside network and firewall with rules. So this firewall supports a dematerialized zone, a DMZ. This is a subnetwork that is going to be open to the public, but it does exist behind the firewall. A DMZ will allow us to redirect packets going to my WAN port IP address to a specific LAN port device. We'll do that today. We can also set up firewall rules to limit what type of traffic can reach the DMZ, so it isn't an open door for all network connections. That's set it up. We can do it. What we're going to do first is go into networking, followed by LAN. Like we're doing a firewall though. Yes, the DMZ configuration settings on this box are in the LAN area. When I click on DMZ host, we can see here that we get a small amount of options. What we want to do first is we want to actually activate the DMZ. To do that, I'll just go ahead and click on enable for the DMZ. Next, we need to actually set the host IP address, where it's going to be a fixed static IP for the end device that's going to operate in the DMZ. I'm going to change this to 192.168.1.200, which would be the IP address of the end device that should be reachable from the outside world. I'll go ahead and click save, and it'll save our settings. Next, it would be worthwhile to take a look at some port forwarding settings. That's going to be in our firewall section. So I'll click on firewall, and we're going to go straight over to single port forwarding. Now, port forwarding allows us to redirect traffic from the internet by looking for specific traffic arriving on the WAN port. We then forward it to a specific internal end device on one of our LAN ports. By default, we can see there's a couple items created for us. They're not activated because the enable button has not been checked. And also, there's no internal IP address to forward the traffic to. Now, this is an awesome feature for hosting services on end devices that need to be reachable from the outside. This could be common for accessing internal devices from the outside, such as IP cameras, gaming servers, and more that you'd have on your internal network. What we're going to do is create our own port forwarding rule. I'm going to name mine IPCam1. And with IPCam1 as the name, I will then choose the external port that the people are hitting on the WAN port of my router. So for example, let's say people will be targeting my WAN IP address with a port number of 8090. Then when traffic is hitting my WAN port on port 8090, we're going to have that target an internal port running on our IP camera device. That internal port on the IP camera device, for example, might be 1044. I would choose the protocol being used by my IP camera. Most likely it'll be UDP based. The WAN interface, I'm going to choose Ethernet. 3G is AN. We don't need that. We'll use Ethernet, which is the WAN port we have plugged in. Lastly, I need to type in the private IP address of my IP camera. This would be 192.168.1.150. I'll make sure I have this rule be activated by clicking the Enable checkbox, and then wallow it onto the bottom. And we will click Save. We're good to go. Now we're going to continue on and take a look at some of our basic settings of our firewall. Oddly enough, we're just going to click Basic Settings. I love it. When the screen loads up, what we're going to do is take a look at some of the default security settings that have been set from the top. We have some anti-spoofing settings in order to protect against internal users that are trying to pretend to be a network device that they are not. That is turned on by default. We also have denial of service protection, which is going to prevent our firewall from being overwhelmed by malicious traffic. We're even blocking ping requests because we're not going to respond to people that try to ping our internet address on our router's WAN port. A bit further down, we can see that our firewall is only allowing an administrator to configure it by using an encrypted HTTPS session. That's right here, called remote access. These remote settings here, if we actually allowed them, would actually allow an administrator to exist outside on the internet and remotely access our router and change the configurations. Now, there are a lot of security settings down below here regarding allowing specific IP addresses to do this from the public side, as well as a port that the WAN port will be listening on. But then again, this is going to be a risky maneuver. So if you do that, be sure you have a very strong password or passphrase. Scrolling down to the bottom, we now are going to take a look at UPnP. UPnP is known as Universal Plug and Play. This will allow automatic discovery of devices that can communicate with the firewall. And the scary part is, if necessary, even modify our firewall to allow for device access from outside the WAN. This will be using features such as port forwarding. Now, while the universal plug-and-play settings may offer convenience, it's better to set up your own firewall rules and port forwarding yourself. Now, if we want to do some more fine control of what can happen regarding internal traffic, especially so that once it got to the web, we can. I can go to my access rules section, and here I can find this special area where I can add in rows of rules. For example, by clicking on Add Row, inside of here I can choose the connection type, going inbound or going outbound. For example, that's say coming inbound WAN to LAN. I can have an action, what's going to happen regarding this traffic. Also, we can even set up a schedule for when this should take place, time and day. Regarding services, we can pick what type of traffic. We can even do even more fine-tuned controlling than this using the Configure Services area. Source, from what place on the internet, could be any. Destination, from what place inside my internal network. Single address. You have single address because we're talking about traffic destined for our local area network. This is where we would choose what devices on the internal side should not have traffic arriving to it from a specific public WAN. We'll be able to activate this rule using our enable button. Also, we're even able to log it. So when this traffic does come through and it is dropped, it will actually be taken note of inside of our wireless router firewall. So what we want to do now is focus more on content preventing users from reaching specific websites, the inside to outside, but being able to talk content, not just IP addressing like we see here. That's going to be under Internet Access Policy. I'll click on that and we'll head over there next. In Internet Access Policy, I can create multiple policies and activate them on my firewall. I'm going to be able to, let's say, whitelist and blacklist items. Let me show you. I'll click Add Row, and inside of here, we can create a policy name. For example, we can call it Test, and with it being called Test, we then have actions, what to do regarding this policy we're about to create. Block on a schedule, allow on a schedule, always block it, or always allow it. That's called blacklist or whitelist, respectively. Down below, apply access policy to the following PCs. You can choose who this policy is going to be effective for. We can base it off of a range of addresses, a specific IP address, or even a hardware-level MAC address. Besides that, when we want to talk about what can we actually block, down below in the website domain name and keyword area, we can click Add Row here. And here you can choose to block based off of domain name or even based off of a keyword that's going to be utilized. Now, this is going to be awesome. The reason it's going to be awesome is because this all works together to identify the devices as well as identify what they're allowed to access or not allowed to access. Now with all these settings we've looked at, every firewall will be a little bit different. But the best thing you can do is practice in their configurations and view the result on an internal PC of that network. Make sure you do this outside of business hours, and you'll be well on your way to becoming an IT professional. Have you ever heard about the Unified Extensible Firmware Interface? Maybe not, but I bet you have heard of a UEFI BIOS. Well, UEFI stands for Unified Extensible Firmware Interface. We're going to kick it off here and investigate the UEFI BIOS. I'll do the investigating, and you'll get the tour. Let's begin. So my computer here has just booted into the UEFI BIOS. Every computer is a little bit different, and they require different keystrokes in order to access the BIOS. For example, my computer required me to press the delete key after I first turned it on. So here we are. This is a real BIOS, not a simulated BIOS. In the top left corner, you can see my motherboard's model number, awesome, and my CPU temperature. Right below that, you can even see my motherboard temperature. In the middle here, we can actually see our system time and date. Right below that, we can see the current firmware of my UEFI BIOS. What I really enjoy though is in the top right corner of the screen, where you see these listed items here in the top. Here you can view my current CPU, which has 4 CPU cores and 6 GPU cores. You can view the operating frequency for both my CPU and my RAM. You can also see the total size of the RAM that I have installed in my system. Now remember, this is the UEFI BIOS. What that means is I have a graphical user interface that includes keyboard and mouse support. This is very different from what we've seen with legacy BIOS. To further demonstrate this, look at this horizontal bar right below my system time and date and my CPU and RAM. From left to right, this is my boot order of my computer. What's even more awesome is the fact that I can drag and drop these items anywhere. We will focus on configuration of this though in another video. So let's take a quick look inside the UEFI BIOS. Let's start by investigating the left side of the screen. Here we will find that we have an area for motherboard settings, overclocking our system for faster performance, and an area called mFlash, which allows us to flash our system with an updated UEFI BIOS. Now on the right side of the screen, we have a section where you can choose different overclocking profiles. We can pre-build these for the right gaming or video editing occasion. Down below that, we have a hardware monitor where we can check out the power usage and cooling. We can even have customized fan speeds and even view graphs here. And lastly, the Board Explorer is awesome because this allows us to have a beautiful and interactive view of what's actually attached to our motherboard. So let's dive for the deeper look. So first, we'll head over to settings. In settings, we can look at system settings, which I can either click on with a mouse or click the enter key. And inside of here, we see time and date, as well as in text, what's connected to my motherboard and the firmware version. We next are going to have the advanced area. In the advanced area, we do a lot of fine tuning and control of both the peripherals and the power settings of our motherboard. Another item we can customize is going to be the boot settings. So head back out and go to boot. This is extremely important. This allows us to customize the boot order of our system, both using device preference and security settings known as secure boot. We take a look at that later on. If you go into the security settings though, we can take a look here and see that we have the ability to set an administrator password. This will prevent other people from accessing and modifying our UEFI BIOS settings. Let's get out of the settings area and let's go all the way over and see overclock. We'll take a quick look at the overclock settings and you can see all the customizations possible here. This allows you to fine-tune your machine for the performance that you desire, but this may cause some extra wear and tear in your system due to increased heat. Next, we will have the mFlash section. This is where you can utilize tools in order to flash your UEFI BIOS with the latest firmware. This is commonly done with a USB key or flash drive plugged in. Not too much. Heading to the right side, we'll go over to our overclocking profiles. This is where we can pick what overclocking profile to use that we have pre-built and saved for a given situation. This should be good for gaming or video editing, or maybe even normal computing use. Last two sections. We'll take a trip into the hardware monitor. Here we can look at the CPU fan speed, temperature, as well as cased fan speeds. Some UEFI will even allow you to set an average temperature you'd like your system to stay at, and your cooling fans will react accordingly to do their best to keep your system as close to that target temperature as possible. Love it. We'll back up and take a look at that Board Explorer. I click on the Board Explorer. This is great. In the Board Explorer, you can get a graphical view of your motherboard. The highlighted sections allow you to hover your mouse over them and read a description of what is connected to that component. For example, if I were to take my mouse cursor and I can hover over the RAM slot where my memory is, I can actually see information regarding it. You can see that each RAM slot has a 4 gig memory chip installed. Also, if I hover over my SATA ports, we'll get information on what is connected to that individual SATA port. You can see that I have 2 SATA devices attached. One of these is my device here, and the other one is Blu-ray disc DVD-ROM drive. This is a great UEFI tool to visually see how the motherboard is arranged and what is connected to your machine without even opening the case. So if you have time to take, get into your BIOS and view your settings and learn how your device is connected and running. Hello there, we are back in the UEFI BIOS, and this time we're here to change some settings. In this video, we get to configure the UEFI BIOS, and we are going to explore the following items. We will set up our boot options, customize our security settings, take part in some interface configurations, and even use the firmware backup and update tool. So let's begin. We want to configure our boot options. Now you think we jump straight into motherboard settings and hit boot, but technically we don't even have to go there. On the main UEFI BIOS screen, I can quickly and easily see my boot order listed in this horizontal toolbar. Now this is awesome because if I want my optical drive to be given more preference than something else, I can just click and drag that optical drive to the front of the list. And now it's being given the first boot order preference, such as the optical drive would be booted from before the hard disk drive or USB or anything else. This is great. Now this feature does depend on your motherboard and UEFI firmware, so let's take a look at the official method as well. We'll go into settings, and then I can go ahead and click on boot. And inside of here, we'll see this massive list. Now before we just dive into this list, I'd like to take note of the boot mode select. With boot mode select here, I see that the default option is legacy and UEFI. It has been predicted that in the next couple of years, the legacy will no longer exist. It is here at this time to allow our board to be backward compatible with devices that require legacy BIOS settings. If you'd like to, you can select the option and you do actually deal with a click UEFI only, as long as you know your devices will still be supported. Let's continue. So down below is my list. My current boot option 1 is set as my optical drive, the UEFI CD DVD. That's from our previous drag and drop maneuver. To modify this list, you could just click on any one of these items, such as, for example, boot option 1. And I can choose what device will be booted first. For example, how about my USB key? There we go, and now that's first. You see that horizontal list from left to right has changed up above. We'd also go and click on any one of these items and use the plus or minus arrows to move them up or down on the list as well. I personally like the drag and drop option we saw previously. Next, it's time to take a look at some security settings. Back to motherboard settings, then into security. We can find some important settings that we can configure. Here in the security settings, let's take a look at the passwords. Administrator password can be set to prevent other people from accessing and changing your BIOS settings. I'll click enter, and we're going to make this thing, is already password on it, then save our BIOS. You're going to need that password of Cisco to do it. Now the user password down below. This is special. This can be set in order to prevent the operating system from loading on your machine until a user has entered the correct user password stored here in BIOS. Further, there's this feature called UKey. The UKey feature allows the BIOS administrator to dedicate a password to a specific USB key or flash drive. The USB key or flash drive will be needed to be plugged into your machine When a user wants to access the operating system of the machine, wow, never knew a USB flash drive could be so important. Let's continue on and take a look at some of the interface configuration settings. In the main settings area, we're going to go into Advanced. And inside of Advanced, we're going to access the integrated peripherals. Within the integrated peripherals, we're going to find a good amount of settings to control. In this section, we have the ability to control the onboard LAN controller. This is our physical network card of the device. We can actually disable it here if we don't want to use it. We take a look at Wi-Fi and Bluetooth controller. We can also control if the Wi-Fi and Bluetooth components are allowed to be used on the computer. Think of this as using software to disable individual hardware components on the physical computer before the operating system even got a chance to use it. This is awesome. We can even make changes to how the SATA hard drives are going to be viewed. For example, I can click Enter on SATA mode. We had these SATA hard drives in the Legacy IDE mode, current AHCI mode, or even by utilizing RAID. On top of all that, down below, we can customize if the SATA connections are allowed to be hot swappable as well. Let's back up a little bit and take a look at some USB configuration. In Settings, Advanced USB Configs, we want to take a look here and see that we can actually control both legacy USB port as well as disabling or enabling a USB controller itself. With this coming into mind, I want you to imagine this machine being in a high-risk or high-profile environment, and you have to be the IT professional that is concerned about people bringing in external USB flash drives. Problem identified and problem solved. Let's take a step back. Now what we want to take a look at is our Windows configuration. Right here in the Windows configuration, we can control how quickly our machine will boot. We can do this by activating Fast Boot or by activating MSI Fast Boot. These will allow your systems to come online more quickly by skipping some of the more thorough post-verification tests. Next, you want to talk about what makes our machine boot in the morning, and that's our wake-up event settings. We can click on this item to control what is allowed to wake up our computer and turn it on. There's a couple here, not too many. We have one last section to cover in this video, and we're going to go all the way back, and we're going to head over to mFlash. mFlash is all about firmware updates for our UEFI BIOS. We will have the ability to save our current BIOS to a USB flash drive that's plugged in. This will allow us to restore it at a later date. We also have the ability to update the BIOS using this tool. So for example, I can click Save BIOS to Storage. And there is my disk, which I can click on. Leave the default. And it's saving it to my By using the Update BIOS feature, we can load a BIOS file that is on a USB flash drive that is plugged into our machine. Now, this is going to be awesome because this is your storing and recovery, especially when you have settings that you're concerned about losing and not having in the future. We can use the Update BIOS feature to actually select a file off of a USB thumb drive. And here, if I had a BIOS ready to go, I can click on the UEFI flash thumb drive and be able to update the BIOS itself. Now, while every UEFI BIOS will be a little bit different, you should have a much better understanding of how to configure some of the important settings within your UEFI BIOS.